Welcome back. All right, so first off, yes, there were a lot of logos at the top of the board. So they had the stick and rink first. This is, of course, the recolored one that they had when they switched their logo. That was not the main logo that was on the shoulder. This is the modernized stick and rink that has adorned the shoulder as well. That's undergone a color change as well. Then they had the skate logo, which everybody seems to love. They switched over to the Orca, which then got recolored, and also Johnny Canuck. This is the Johnny Canuck currently used by the Abbotsford Canucks. This is the Johnny Canuck that was a throwback to the 1960s Johnny Canuck before they were a National Hockey League team and was used on the reverse retro. All right, video's done. Good night, everybody. No. So under Bruce Boudreau, the Vancouver Canucks went 18-25-3. And it was ugly towards the end. We all knew he was getting fired. We knew when he was getting fired. And we knew why they were setting it up that way. So the discussion was simple. The Canucks had a really, really hard road trip. And so Boudreau, who was already basically done, just left hanging there. And everybody knew he was done. It was the weirdest thing. They just leave the team under his leadership to go out on the road trip and get killed, which they did. And then after that road trip was done, they're like, okay, well, we've decided this morning to get rid of Boudreau and just happened to have Rick Tocchet in town, which was the rumor weeks ago, but we made this decision today because sure, Tocchet with a record of 20-12-4 after he took over. Now, were the Canucks better under Tocchet? Yes. Was the schedule easier under Tocchet? Also, yes. So it's a situation now where Rick Tocchet comes out of this year looking good. Boudreau looked good coming out of last year. Now, the difference is simple. Boudreau, there were rumors last summer that he wasn't really the Canucks pick and they weren't going to keep him and all this just oddity. And, of course, he didn't get an extension on his contract. And so there was a lot of discussion when it came to the Vancouver Canucks about what was going to happen with coaching before the season even started. And then they got off to that terrible start. They get off to terrible starts. This has been a problem for the Canucks for a long time, having to dig their way out of whatever start they dig themselves into. And so it's something to keep an eye on this fall because clearly this is a team that envisions themselves as a playoff team in 2024. We heard the GM say we were only 6 wins away from the playoffs. That sounds a lot less than 12 points. That's the wonderful thing, is to be able to say, well, we're only 9 wins short of the playoffs out of an 82-game schedule. We can find 9 wins out of 82 games instead of saying we were 18 points out of the playoffs and we feel like we can make it. So in this case, it's 12 points, 6 wins. And yeah, they could make up the difference, but they're going to have to make some changes. So one thing that happened this year too was there was a new leadership group that emerged. So Bo Horvat gets traded off to the New York Islanders. And that trade has worked out pretty well. I'm going to say for both teams, although I know people aren't happy with Bo's contract. I know he's not scoring enough, yada, yada, yada. But I do think that Bo Horvat provided something to the Islanders they needed that helped get them to the playoffs. That face-off ability, his two-way game, I think helped the Islanders a lot. So Elias Pettersson, with Horvat leaving town, has really kind of become the leader, although it does feel like he's not as interested in the captaincy as maybe Quinn Hughes. Pettersson in 2020, 2021, in 26 games had 10 goals, 11 assists, 21 points. Wrist injury. And it definitely affected his game. And that went into last year as well. Last season in 80 games, he had 32 goals, 36 assists, 68 points. Those are decent totals, but they're not what the Canucks were hoping for from him. And I don't think it's what he wanted from himself. This year, the numbers, pretty darn good. In 80 games, he has 39 goals, 63 assists, 102 points. So he is the latest Canuck to reach 100 points, and the plan is to keep him around for as long as he wants to stay around. And one of the reasons why the Canucks won't go into a rebuild is because they'd be concerned Pettersson would then want out. He'd be like, all right, well, I want to win. I'm in my prime. And he ends up going somewhere else. Now, JT Miller, I expect there to be a lot of discussion about whether or not he's going. I don't think he is. I talked about this the other day, too. The year-end presser, just the way Tocchet's talked about Miller, the way that Miller has talked about playing in Vancouver, I don't think there's any chance he's leaving town. In 2020, 2021, in 53 games, he had 15 goals, 31 assists, 46 points, which was seen as mildly disappointing after the great season he had the year before. But then last year in 80 games, he had 32 goals, 67 assists, 99 points. Of course, he signs the long-term extension, which people really hated. But this year in 81 games, 32 goals, 50 assists, 82 points. So he's still a point per game player. He was much better after Tocchet took over. I can't prove there was any kind of rift in the locker room because I wasn't in the locker room. So I can't prove there was a rift there. But it definitely feels like things got better. Now, we can look at this and say, hey, kudos to management for making that change. My answer's been something different, which is, well, then why didn't they make it sooner if they knew everything was a disaster? And if they weren't tanking, so if the plan was, well, this season's at a loss, we're not going to make it, why make the change? Just ride it out with Boudreau, ride it out with players, make your trades, you trade out Horvat, and then you commit to getting better next year. But they won a lot of games down the stretch that didn't really mean anything and took them out of a position to draft higher. Now, the discussion can still be had about, how deep this draft is and how well they're going to draft. But it just felt like it was an odd strategy. If you're trying to make the playoffs, you make the move to change the coach sooner. And you make the move to change the locker room sooner. You make trades earlier. You get that. If that's a problem, you make sure you're fixing that. If your plan is you're not going to make the playoffs anyway, so it's not a big deal, it just feels like it's a weird timing. And anyways, we'll see how it goes for the next season. Quinn Hughes, 56 games played in 2020-2021, 3 goals, 38 assists, 41 points. Last year, in 76 games, he had 8 goals, 60 assists, 68 points. He wanted to get more goals this year. It did not happen. In 78 games, 7 goals, 69 assists, 76 points. He will get a season of 15-plus goals. It's going to happen at some point. But at the very least, he has been one of the fastest players on the blue line to reach 200 points in his career. One of the fastest players to, 200 assists as well. And at any rate, Hughes putting up a lot of points and resetting the record book when it comes to defensemen in Vancouver. He is the best defenseman the Canucks have ever had, with all apologies to Ed Jovanovski. Jovanovski did not have the overall packages to his game, whether you're looking at the offensive side, the defensive side. His defense is underrated. He doesn't have the hitting, obviously, that Jovanovski had, but I would still take Hughes over Jovanovski in their primes. Now, there are some interesting storylines here, too. So there's Kravtsov, who in 16 games after the trade from the Rangers, he had some good games, but it faded. And so 1 goal, 1 assist for him. He's a restricted free agent this summer. He is 23 years of age. I'd be very surprised if he comes back. He probably doesn't get a qualifying offer and probably ends up in the KHL, would be my guess. Hirose was good. 7 games, 3 assists. He ends up being a minus, but it's a small sample size, but I thought he played well, so he should be back next year. Hronek, of course, only played 4 games because of injury. He had 1 assist. It'll be interesting to see how he does next year and if he really does improve the blue line as much as the Vancouver Canucks think he will. Podkolzin has been a project. 39 games, 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points. I thought Pods' game got better under Tocchet, which again lends itself to the, all right, so if you're worried about the development of players, if you're worried about, if it's really this important this year, you make that move, you get Tocchet in there sooner. And if you can't get Tocchet because of whatever agreement he has with TNT, ESPN, then you find somebody else to take over in the interim. I've never seen a team not wanting to use an interim coach before. I find it weird. Höglander, who spent most of the season in Abbotsford, 25 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points. Probably ends up playing for Vancouver next season, but it really depends on where Tocchet sees him in the lineup. And he may very well end up in Abbotsford. But yeah, Höglander's going to be an interesting one. And Seelovs is an interesting conversation to have as well, because he goes 3-2, so limited appearances with Vancouver, .908 save percentage. Spencer Martin was put into way too many games because of Demko getting hurt, and yeah, the numbers weren't pretty. Martin's getting his game back now in Abbotsford, but he is an AHL goaltender who can fill in at the NHL level. I think the expectations for Martin were probably not too high, but when Demko got hurt, they really needed a starter, and they didn't have one. The UFAs this summer, Burrows, who may come back, and if he wants to come back, it won't be that expensive of a deal. There's Colin Delia, backup goaltender. I thought Delia was fine, but again, Vancouver's going to be looking for an upgrade there. And Noah Juleson, who I kind of hope, fingers crossed, re-signs in Vancouver to keep him here in Abbotsford. I think he enjoys playing in Abbotsford, being an Abbotsford kid, and also hopefully decides to stick around. Restricted free agents, I mentioned Kravtsov. I would not be surprised to see him not get a qualifying offer and end up going as an unrestricted free agent instead. Ethan Bear wants to stick around. He's saying all the right things. We'll see if that feeling is mutual between the Canucks and him. Everything I've heard, it sounds like it is. Hirose, very likely to stick around too. Dermott, I don't think gets qualified. Dermott had another injury-riddled season, and so probably doesn't get any kind of a qualifying offer. Probably ends up going to market. Höglander, yeah, they'll probably qualify Höglander and try to figure out a spot for him in the roster next year. Höglander is one of those interesting players that I don't know that he has the skill for the top 6 position in the NHL, and I don't know if his game completely suits a bottom 6 role in the National Hockey League, but we'll see what happens with him next year. And they're already over next year's cap, so I don't need to talk about the cap space they do or don't have because there isn't any. However, Pearson very well likely not playing next year. That is the final year of his contract. There's discussion about if he can't go next year that he may pursue a lawsuit, legal route with the Vancouver Canucks because he feels his injury was not treated properly, which was discussed earlier this season and then kind of went away, but it's still there. And so in the event that Pearson's injury doesn't heal correctly because something happened with the Canucks medical staff where they misdiagnosed or just treated it wrongly, we'll see where that goes. And it doesn't look like Pullman is anywhere near playing. Pullman, who signed that contract that was expensive at the time, but again, it probably just ends up getting put on LTIR, means that the Canucks will have some limited cap space, but it's not a lot. And then you look at who's up in 2024, and this is really your big storyline, in that Pettersson's up, so they want to sign him long-term. Beauvillier's up. I don't know if Beauvillier plays in Vancouver next year because of the cap issues they have. He may end up being a casualty of that. Podkolzin's an RFA next year, so that should hopefully get a good season out of him. Joshua, who's been excellent, I think this summer you look at signing him to an extension. Studnicka, restricted free agent. I think he had some good games in Vancouver, but it's a situation where he's probably not on their roster next year. At least that's quite possible. Dries, I love Dries' game. Dries is on the small side, though, and there's the good possibility that if they do find that third-line center they're talking about bringing in, Dries may end up back in Abbotsford next year. Myers, of course, his bonus pays out on July 1st. After that, his salary's only $1 million. So you're getting a $6 million cap hit, but you're only paying him $1 million. There are teams that may very well take him on. The Canucks will desperately be looking to unload Myers, is my guess. Hronek's an RFA in 2024, and it's going to be interesting to see with Pettersson up and Hronek up how much that costs. Vancouver has not had cap space for a very, very, very long time, considering how remarkably mediocre they've been. So when teams are missing the playoffs all the time, but they've got cap space, I kind of get it. But if you're always missing the playoffs and you don't have cap space, there's something going on there. And of course, as I mentioned before, Tanner Pearson's contract is up in 2024. I hope Pearson can come back and play. I genuinely do. So since they made the playoffs in 2013, which was kind of the last hurrah for the Sedin era, that was where things started going downhill. In 2013, 2014, their points percentage was .506. They missed the playoffs. That was the Tortorella season. Then Willie Desjardins takes over, and they were so relieved to play under Desjardins. Their numbers came up. They had a .616 points percentage, and then in the playoffs, they lost against Calgary in the first round. They just didn't have what they needed to get out of the first round. 2015, 2016, they crashed .457 points percentage. 2016, 2017, a .421 points percentage. 2017, 2018, it went up to a .445, and in 2018, 2019, .494. So the numbers were getting better, and my optimism became notable in videos and just in life in general. 2019, 2020, their points percentage went up to .565. They made the playoffs. They knocked out Minnesota in the play-in round. Then they knocked out the defending champion Blues, and then they pushed Vegas to 7. All right, their goaltending pushed Vegas to 7, but either way, they lost against Vegas in the second round. 2020, 2021, they crashed, and it was the most disappointing season I think I've ever had watching Vancouver. I don't know, I could probably do a top 10 list of most disappointing seasons watching Vancouver. I could easily find 10 of them, but they had a .446 points percentage. Then last year, after the firing of Travis Green, who had just signed an extension, They go 561 on the season, but if Green hadn't been brought back, if they used Boudreau from the start of the year, maybe they make the playoffs. This year they crash out again. They fix it by bringing in Tocchet, probably too late. They end up with a 506 points percentage, the same one they had under Tocchet. They're under Tortorella. They now have under Tocchet, with of course Boudreau's record in there as well. So they're really kind of all over the place, but that's only 2 playoff appearances in the last decade. And so this is why when people say, oh, well, they need a rebuild. Yeah, they've never committed to a rebuild. And yet here we are. They're a team that they don't really have those prime prospects. They have some very good young players in the lineup because there have been times where they've drafted well in the top 10, but they haven't had that franchise-altering player. As great as Pettersson is, I'm talking like Bedard. Basically, they're not going to get Bedard. We know they're not going to get Bedard. Part of the reason I picked them to make the playoffs this year is because they made the playoffs in 2015. That was the season, of course, that McDavid gets drafted first overall. And boy, could the Vancouver Canucks in 2014-15 have used that kind of a player, because you could see that this team was having that bounce and probably wasn't sustainable. So when we look at contracts that might get traded, because they need to create cap space, if they're going to fix their blue line, maybe that gets done from within. Maybe the players they have currently are enough. But if they're going to fix their goaltending and get that veteran backup that they need, Besser may end up being traded. He's rescinded his trade request, but the team is still, I think, listening to offers. He makes $6.65 million, at least that's the cap hit, till 2025. Connor Garland, $4.95 million till 2026. Garland didn't have a great year, but it's possible he might be an attractive option this summer once the free agent market dries up a bit. Beauvillier, $4.15 million until next summer. He had a great start with Vancouver. I thought he faded a little bit towards the end of the year. But yeah, Beauvillier at $4 million might attract some attention. Tyler Myers, as mentioned, $6 million until next year. And then you have Oliver Ekman-Larsson's contract. He was hampered by injury and he seemed a little out of sorts this year. $7.25 million per season until 2027. So this is a team that's gone through various changes to their look, and this is the latest skate jersey, which is different from the original skate. And they may end up going to this look. They may decide this summer, hey, we're going back to the skate. Yay, skate. Everybody be happy. But without playoffs, without some kind of upward momentum, without seeing that record for Tocchet's doubled, so they'd be 40, 24, and 8, and yeah, then you make the playoffs, right? Unless we see some dramatic turnaround, I don't know, you can change the logo to whatever you'd like. And it does feel like, and this is the first time I've used these in a video for this purpose, the Donald Duck magnets I made a few weeks ago, that other fans are constantly laughing at Canuck fans who are freaking out about whatever. We might be mad about the salary cap. We might be mad about a loss where they had a 3-0 lead in the first period. We might be mad about a contract signing that we didn't like. We might be mad about whatever. And then other fans get a chance to have a good laugh, because Vancouver has been in that mediocre range where they're not quite bad enough to get that number 1 draft pick. And again, they've done well with Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson. I'm not going to pretend that Pettersson and Hughes aren't great players, because they are, but it feels like they haven't committed. They haven't had those multiple first-round draft picks. They haven't had, drafts where, hey, in the first 3 rounds, we got 8 picks. That has never been Vancouver. And, if they had done that back in 2017, if they had done that in 2018, but they had Benning, who continuously signed contracts going, yep, all right, we're going to fix this. We're going to fix this. And we're going to get right back in the playoff hunt. And it just holds them back. It keeps them good enough that they're not in the same ranges like this year. You have Anaheim, Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. They've never been in that range, but they haven't been good enough to really, truly push for the playoffs outside of 2015 and 2020. So some frustration, I understand, in Vancouver land, and I also understand why other fans find it kind of funny. I get it, because it does feel like this summer, when they're talking about we're only 6 wins short, we need a third-line center, we're going to fix our blue line. Okay, here we go. All right. Because it does feel like since Kessler got traded all those years back that they've always had that issue finding that third-line center. It's been an issue for Vancouver. And so it continues. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.